Years from now, you probably won't remember every grammar rule you studied. You won't remember every vocabulary list you memorized. You won't remember every exercise you completed. But there is a good chance you will remember that one embarrassing moment when you said something wrong in English and wished you could disappear. Maybe people laughed. Maybe someone corrected you. Maybe nobody understood what you were trying to say. Maybe you spent the rest of the day replaying the moment in your head. And maybe, after that experience, you started questioning yourself. Maybe my English isn't good enough. Maybe I'm not ready to speak. Maybe I should study more before trying again. If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. Almost every English learner has experienced moments like these. Moments that feel uncomfortable. Moments that feel embarrassing. Moments that make us wonder if learning English is even worth the effort. But what if I told you that those embarrassing moments are not the enemy? What if I told you that some of your most painful English mistakes might actually become your most valuable learning experiences? And what if those same mistakes could one day help someone else become a better English speaker too? Today, I want to talk about something that most language learners misunderstand. Mistakes. Not the mistakes themselves, but the meaning we attach to them. Because many learners see mistakes as proof that they are failing, when in reality, mistakes are often proof that learning is happening. Think about a child learning to walk. Nobody expects the child to stand up and walk perfectly on the first attempt. The child falls. Again and again. Sometimes hundreds of times. And nobody calls those falls failures. Why? Because we understand that falling is part of learning. It's part of the process. It's expected. Now think about language learning. For some reason, many adults expect themselves to speak perfectly before they have enough experience. They expect confidence before practice. They expect fluency before mistakes. They expect success before struggle. And when reality doesn't match those expectations, they become frustrated. But language learning has never worked that way. Not for children. Not for adults. Not for anyone. Every fluent English speaker you admire today has a collection of embarrassing stories. Every confident speaker has moments they wish they could take back. Every teacher has made mistakes. Every expert was once a beginner. The difference is that they didn't stop. They didn't allow temporary embarrassment to become permanent silence. Let me tell you a story. A young English learner spent almost 2 years studying English. He watched videos every day. He listened to podcasts. He completed grammar exercises. He knew hundreds of vocabulary words. But there was one thing he rarely did. He rarely spoke. The reason was simple. He was afraid. Afraid of making mistakes. Afraid of sounding foolish. Afraid of being judged. One day he joined an online group where people from different countries practiced speaking English together. His heart was racing. His hands felt cold. He was nervous before the conversation even started. For the first 20 minutes, he stayed silent. He listened carefully. He wanted to speak. but fear kept stopping him. Then someone asked him a simple question. What do you usually do on weekends? It should have been easy. He knew the answer. He had the vocabulary. He had the grammar. But when he opened his mouth, panic took over. His mind became blank. The sentence came out wrong. Very wrong. People looked confused. One person asked him to repeat himself. Another person tried to guess what he meant. A few people laughed politely. The learner felt embarrassed. He wished he had never spoken. After the meeting ended, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He replayed the moment over and over again. The mistake seemed huge. The embarrassment felt unbearable. But something interesting happened. The next morning, he still remembered the mistake clearly. A week later, he remembered it. A month later, he remembered it. A year later, he remembered it. In fact, years later, he could still explain exactly what happened. Why? Because emotions create memories. The brain pays attention to emotional experiences. And embarrassment is one of the strongest emotions we can feel. The very thing that made the mistake painful also made it memorable. And because it became memorable, it became educational. The learner never made that mistake again. Not because he studied harder. Not because he bought a new course. Not because he found a secret method. But because the mistake itself became the lesson. Now here's the interesting part. Years later, that learner started helping other English learners. And the story he shared most often wasn't a success story. It wasn't about getting perfect scores. It wasn't about speaking flawlessly. It was about that embarrassing mistake. Because people connected with it. People remembered it. People learned from it. The mistake that once caused embarrassment eventually became a source of value. And that's what many learners fail to realize. Your mistakes are not just teaching you. Sometimes they're preparing you to teach others. Think about the advice that has helped you most in life. Was it perfect information from a textbook? Or was it usually a story? Most people learn through stories. Stories stay with us. Stories make information memorable. Stories create emotional connections. And every mistake you make creates a story. Maybe it's a funny story. Maybe it's an awkward story. Maybe it's a painful story. But it's a story. And stories have power. Imagine two teachers. The first teacher says, "Be careful when using this word." The second teacher says, "I once used this word incorrectly in front of 20 people and everyone laughed." Which lesson are you more likely to remember? The second one. Because stories create images. Stories create emotions. Stories create memories. That's why your mistakes matter. Not because mistakes are enjoyable, but because mistakes are memorable. And memorable lessons are often the most powerful lessons. Unfortunately, many learners never reach this understanding. Instead, they treat mistakes like enemies. Every mistake feels like proof that they're not intelligent enough, not talented enough, not capable enough. But let's be honest. If mistakes truly prevented success, nobody would ever become fluent in any language. Because every fluent speaker has made thousands of mistakes. Thousands. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. Think about that for a moment. The person whose English you admire today probably made more mistakes than you can imagine. The difference is simple. They survived those mistakes. They learned from those mistakes. And most importantly, they continued after those mistakes. One of the most dangerous beliefs in language learning sounds very reasonable. It sounds intelligent. It sounds responsible. But it quietly destroys progress. The belief is, I'll start speaking when I'm ready. At first, that idea feels comforting. You tell yourself that you just need more vocabulary, more grammar, more confidence, more preparation. Then you'll start speaking. But weeks pass. Months pass. Sometimes years pass. And somehow you still don't feel ready. Do you know why? Because readiness doesn't come before speaking. Readiness comes from speaking. Confidence doesn't appear first. Action appears first. Then confidence follows. The learner who waits for confidence often waits forever. The learner who acts despite fear eventually develops confidence. That's how growth works. Not only in language learning. In almost every area of life. People often imagine confident speakers as fearless people. But confidence is rarely the absence of fear. Confidence is usually experience. Experience gained through mistakes. Experience gained through practice. Experience gained through persistence. And persistence is impossible if you're trying to avoid embarrassment at all costs. Because embarrassment is part of the journey, not the end of it. In fact, one day you may look back and laugh at the mistakes that currently bother you. The things that feel huge today may seem small tomorrow. The mistakes that make you cringe now may become your favorite stories later. And when that day comes, you'll realize something important. The real problem was never the mistake. The real problem was the meaning you attached to the mistake. You thought the mistake meant you were failing. But the mistake actually meant you were trying. And trying is where every success begins. And trying is where every success begins. Let me ask you a question. What is worse? Making a mistake while speaking English? Or never speaking English at all? Most learners fear the first one. But in reality, the second one is far more dangerous. A mistake may cost you a few seconds of embarrassment. Silence may cost you years of growth. Think about all the opportunities people miss because they are waiting to become perfect. The conversation they never started. The friendship they never built. The job interview where they stayed quiet. The question they never asked. The idea they never shared. The opportunity that passed by because fear was louder than courage. And here's the sad part. Most of those missed opportunities don't happen because learners lack knowledge. They happen because learners are afraid of making mistakes. Fear becomes a prison. Not a visible prison. Not a prison made of walls. A prison made of self-doubt. A prison made of overthinking. A prison made of imaginary judgments. Because if we're honest, many of the people we fear judgment from aren't thinking about us nearly as much as we imagine. Most people are busy thinking about themselves, their own problems, their own worries, their own insecurities. Yet learners often behave as if every person in the room is waiting for them to make a mistake. And because of that belief, they remain silent. I once heard a language teacher say something very powerful. He said, "People who are learning a language usually think everyone is watching them. In reality, almost nobody is." That sentence contains a lot of truth. Think about your own conversations. How much time do you spend analyzing every mistake another learner makes? Probably very little. You might notice a mistake. You might help them. And then you move on. You don't spend the next week thinking about it. You don't tell everyone about it. You don't create a report about their grammar errors. You forget. Yet when we make mistakes ourselves, we imagine everyone will remember forever. The reality is usually very different. Most mistakes disappear from other people's memories within minutes. But they remain in our own minds because we keep replaying them. We become our own harshest critics. And that criticism often slows our progress more than the mistake itself. Now let me tell you another story. A learner traveled abroad for the first time. He had spent years studying English. He believed he was prepared. Then reality arrived. The moment he started talking to native speakers, he realized something. Real conversations move fast. People use expressions he had never heard before. People spoke with different accents. People interrupted each other. People laughed and changed topics quickly. At first, he felt overwhelmed. One afternoon, he walked into a coffee shop. He wanted to order a drink. Simple, right? But nervousness can turn simple situations into difficult ones. He mixed up his words. The employee looked confused. He tried again. Another mistake. People behind him were waiting. The pressure increased. Finally, after several awkward attempts, he managed to order successfully. Then he sat down feeling embarrassed. He thought, "I've studied for years and I still struggle with something this basic." But later that evening, something interesting happened. He ordered another drink. This time it was easier. The next day it became easier again. A week later, ordering food felt natural. A month later, he barely thought about it. What changed? Did he suddenly become a language genius? No. He gained experience. Experience that only came through mistakes. Experience that only came through discomfort. Experience that only came through practice. And that experience transformed him. Many learners are searching for confidence. But what they actually need is experience. Because experience creates confidence. The two are connected. One grows from the other. Imagine trying to learn swimming without ever entering the water. You can watch videos, read books, study techniques, memorize instructions. But eventually you have to get wet. Language learning is the same. Eventually you have to speak. Eventually you have to risk mistakes. Eventually you have to leave the safety of preparation and enter the reality of communication. And yes, mistakes will happen. Sometimes funny mistakes. Sometimes embarrassing mistakes. Sometimes mistakes that make you want to hide under a table. But every mistake contains information. Every mistake reveals a weakness that can become a strength. Every mistake points toward growth. The problem is that many learners focus only on the emotional pain. They miss the educational value. Imagine a miner searching for gold. When he digs into the ground, he finds dirt. Lots of dirt. More dirt than gold. If he becomes angry every time he sees dirt, he'll never find treasure. The dirt is part of the process. The mistakes are part of the process. You cannot separate growth from struggle. You cannot separate learning from errors. You cannot separate fluency from practice. And you cannot separate practice from mistakes. One of the greatest mindset shifts you can make is this. Stop asking, how can I avoid mistakes? Start asking, what can this mistake teach me? That simple change transforms everything. Instead of fear, you become curious. Instead of shame, you become interested. Instead of avoiding mistakes, you start learning from them. And that is where real progress begins. There is a reason children learn languages so quickly. It's not because they know more grammar. It's not because they have bigger vocabularies. It's not because they are smarter. One major reason is that they are not afraid of looking foolish. Children say things incorrectly all the time. They create words that don't exist. They use wrong grammar. They mispronounce words. Yet they continue speaking. Why? Because communication matters more to them than perfection. Adults often reverse that equation. Perfection becomes more important than communication. And when perfection becomes the goal, progress slows down. Because perfection is impossible. No speaker is perfect. Not even native speakers. Native speakers make mistakes. Teachers make mistakes. Authors make mistakes. Public speakers make mistakes. Everyone does. The difference is that confident people understand something important. A mistake is an event, not an identity. Making a mistake does not make you a failure. Making a mistake means you made a mistake. Nothing more. Nothing less. Unfortunately, many learners turn every small error into a personal judgment. They don't say, I made a mistake. They say, I am bad at English. Do you see the difference? One statement describes an action. The other attacks identity. And when identity becomes involved, motivation suffers. Growth becomes harder. Fear becomes stronger. That's why successful learners separate themselves from their mistakes. They understand that mistakes are feedback, not definitions. Information, not identity. Lessons, not verdicts. And once you understand that distinction, something remarkable happens. Mistakes lose their power to control you. They become teachers instead of enemies. They become guides instead of obstacles. They become stepping stones instead of walls. Years from now, when your English is stronger, you may not remember every lesson you studied. But you will remember the moments that changed you. The moments that challenged you. The moments that embarrassed you. The moments that taught you courage. And perhaps one day, another nervous learner will ask you, "How did you become confident?" And instead of telling them about perfection, you'll tell them about mistakes. You'll tell them about the time you got confused. The time you said the wrong thing. The time everyone laughed. The time you felt embarrassed. And you'll tell them what happened next. You kept going. You kept learning. You kept speaking. And eventually, those mistakes became part of your success story. Because that's what happens when learners refuse to quit. The very moments that once seemed like proof of failure become evidence of growth. And growth, not perfection, is the true goal of language learning.